Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Well, I love the topic of supernovas for the Electric Universe for a couple of big reasons. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, it was well over a decade ago that you wrote your own scientific paper which explained supernovas as a type of electrical discharge. And this paper was peer-reviewed and published in the IEEE's Transactions on Plasma Science. People who call themselves skeptics of the electric universe have always demanded more peer-reviewed material. And yet I have to wonder how many of these, quote, skeptics have ever bothered to read the aforementioned peer-reviewed paper. And number two, in recent years, there have been several supernova discoveries, which according to the scientists making the discoveries, are not merely surprising, but rather they, quote, break all the rules, and they upend all conventional thought on the very nature of stars and of supernovas. The standard story of a supernova, of course, is that when a star has exhausted its nuclear fuel, it will gravitationally collapse, and then a rebound effect produces an explosion. Well, a little over 2 years ago, there was a supernova which science media dubbed the, quote, zombie star, because it appeared to first explode well over half a century ago, and then more than 50 years later, it appeared to, quote, come back to life and explode again. Here's what phys.org wrote on this story a couple of years ago. The finding, published by Nature, completely confounds existing knowledge of a star's end of life. Somehow, this star exploded more than half a century ago, survived, and exploded again in 2014. And the lead author of a paper on the findings said, "This supernova breaks everything we thought we knew about how they work." Now, as I see it, here's the real taproot of the, quote, crisis in cosmology, which we've been referring to for over 8 years on this series. It's not that discovery is sometimes, or actually quite often, surprising or mystifying for astronomers. Anyone can be surprised by discovery, especially when we're talking about the incredibly complex nature of the remotest phenomena observed throughout the universe. No one, including proponents of plasma cosmology and the electric universe, can claim to have all of the answers. But the real essence of the, quote, crisis is that, very simply, discovery doesn't change anything. The aforementioned supernova, quote, breaks everything astronomers thought they knew about how supernovas work. That's not according to me. It's not according to Wal Thornhill. It's according to the scientists who made the discovery. Today, what indication exists that any new theories of supernovas and of the nature of stars are actually being considered? Science is simply moving forward as if nothing has changed.
That's right. There are a bewildering number of categories of supernovae, and new ones are being found that don't follow the rules. The electrical model of stars, on the other hand, put forward by Ralph Jurgens, has been successfully tested by the SAPPHIRE experiment, and it shows that plasma double layers or sheaths are formed around all bright stars. And a feature of double layers is that they can explode suddenly under stress and throw open the star's galactic power switch. When that happens, the electromagnetic energy stored in the local galactic circuit is suddenly unleashed like an arc welder on the star's surface. That's why a supernova can briefly outshine its entire galaxy. The nearest recent supernova, 1987A in the Large Magellanic Cloud, a dwarf galaxy satellite of the Milky Way, is only 6 times more distant from us than the center of the Milky Way, and showed glowing features of a star's circuit, with its 3 coaxial rings of pearls defining the characteristic hourglass shape of a plasma pinch. So when this short circuit occurs at a star, the circuit itself is trying to deliver more power suddenly to the star itself, and the circuit in this case became visible, and is still visible. Supernovae type 1a are used as standard candles by astronomers, and their faintness used as one measure of the distance of remote galaxies. I said earlier, Halton Arp showed quasars with high redshift are connected to nearby galaxies, which means that the redshift is not a measure of distance. He went on to show that redshift is a measure of the lower energy and youthfulness of an object, and not that it is moving away from us at high speed. In other words, The universe is not expanding. There was no Big Bang. And in the case of the lower than expected brightness of the supernovae type 1a in these youthful objects, that is due to the lower energy of the quasar itself, having been recently born from the center of an active galactic nucleus. The Nobel Prizes for this discovery were awarded based on an assumption. That assumption is incorrect.
Very good. Well, while moving on to another example of high-energy electromagnetic phenomena on an even larger scale, in late 2019, NASA released a new image of a feature which has been dubbed the, quote, cosmic candy cane near the center of the Milky Way galaxy. This image is extremely interesting for a number of reasons from the electric universe vantage point. A NASA press release says that the cosmic candy cane, quote, spans 190 light years and is one of a set of long, thin strands of ionized gas called filaments that emit radio waves. The GISMO instrument detected the most prominent radio filament in the galactic center, known as the radio arc, which forms the straight part of the cosmic candy cane. Scientists say the filaments delineate the edges of a large bubble produced by some energetic event at the galactic center, located within the bright region known as Sagittarius A, about 27,000 light years away from us. Additional red arcs in the image reveal other filaments. And a member of NASA's GISMO team says of the image, "It was a real surprise to see the radio arc in the GISMO data. Its emission comes from high-speed electrons spiraling in a magnetic field, a process called synchrotron emission." Of course, plasma cosmology proposes that something very different from a black hole is actually at the center of the Milky Way, and in fact of all galaxies. So what are your thoughts on what we're actually seeing in this image?
The cosmic candy cane is actually composed of parallel current filaments, which are drawn together because the electric current is flowing in the same direction along parallel conducting paths. And all of this kind of phenomena were described and explained decades ago by plasma cosmologists. But because of the specialism that exists in science these days, the specialists in one field, having developed their own story, do not like to have it disturbed by paying attention to someone else with a parallel story, even if that parallel story explains the observations without having to invent dark matter, dark energy, black holes, and all of the other paraphernalia that current standard cosmology has invested so much time and money in. Filamentary structures at the center of our galaxy are part of the circuit of the galaxy itself. The electric current flows in the form mostly of fast electrons, into the center of the galaxy, and they spiral in to form what's known to plasma cosmologists as a plasmoid, which is a tiny donut-shaped electromagnetic phenomenon, which occasionally, when it becomes too dense, too many particles jammed into the small space at the center of the galaxy, it will break down and emit jets along the axis of the donut. Now, all of these things are seen and explained by plasma cosmology, but ignored by those who control the funding.
Well, speaking of big funding in the world of science, last year there was a major announcement that garnered international news headlines when scientists announced the first ever detection of a collision between a hypothetical neutron star and a hypothetical black hole. But last month, the first papers were released on this alleged event, and what they're reporting is that a scan of the region of space where the hypothetical collision took place has literally revealed nothing. Here is a snippet from a ScienceAlert.com report on this development. It states, "Last year, the LIGO and Virgo gravitational wave detectors pinged with an entirely new kind of collision. Not two neutron stars, not two black holes, but a neutron star and a black hole together. Scientists were thrilled. This could be the first time we've ever witnessed such a binary system. Now, after poring over the corner of space in which the collision took place, an international team of astronomers has seen the aftermath, or rather the lack of one. Using some of the world's most powerful astronomical instruments, the collaboration found not even a brief flash of light associated with the collision." And the report also noted that the papers were still awaiting peer review. Now, Wall, since we have challenged the very existence of neutron stars and black holes, why don't you explain why a failure to find evidence of a collision between these types of objects is a predictable outcome from the electric universe perspective?
The standard modelists are having extreme difficulties because the physics they are using is missing. There is no explanation of gravity. All we have are their equations. There is no definition of mass or energy in physics today, which is an incredible indictment when you think of the amount of money we spend chasing various rabbits down holes that are invented by these standard modelists. The idea of a black hole, in fact, is one of these tricks that mathematicians use of reifying objects and phenomena that involve infinities. The idea that you can continually compress matter to form a black hole is based on a total lack of understanding of gravity and also a total lack, as I said, of a definition of the mass of an object. In fact, even our encyclopedias and textbooks on physics will confuse the two words mass and matter as if they are equivalent. And in fact, often the words are used interchangeably. But mass is a property of matter. It is not equivalent. And E equals mc squared, that well-known but misunderstood equation, says that mass is related to energy. In other words, mass is an energetic variable. So this gives you some idea that modern physics lacks any firm foundation. And we can blame Einstein and those who have followed him for this situation because his theory of relativity made each independent observer, no matter how they are travelling, the centre of their own private universe. And this, of course, is impossible. Physics, before it left the rails, was blessed with absolute standards of space and time, which meant that you could define things sensibly. We have not been able to do so ever since the theories of relativity were introduced. The fundamental error with black hole theory is that gravity is only an attractive force. But as some wag said, only an idiot would design a universe with an unbalanced force. The electric universe says, no, there is only one force in the universe, it is the electric force. Gravity, magnetism, and the nuclear forces are all manifestations of the way matter responds to the electric force. And a fundamental issue there is the idea that subatomic particles, protons, electrons, and so on, have structure themselves. Since they have electrical structure, they will deform in the presence of an electric field. And we know this simply because particle accelerators seem to increase the mass of a subatomic particle in that accelerator. In other words, you apply a force to that particle and the energy is absorbed by that particle in deformation. It changes shape from maybe a sphere into an ellipsoid, a football shape, and in doing so, it absorbs energy. Rather than accelerating, it is absorbing energy, and that's where E equals mc squared comes from. It's very simple. So when we talk about the effects of a black hole, we are talking about energies which manifest as if the object had the mass of 70 suns, but instead we may be looking at a system which is responding to electromagnetic forces and not that of gravity. So this is where one of the fundamental errors comes in when people talk about black holes at the centres of galaxies with millions or billions of times the mass of our sun. No, what we're talking about is an object there, a compact object, the most compact form of electromagnetic energy storage known in the laboratory. And so it's that energy which manifests as if it has that kind of mass. The interest in a merger between a neutron star and a black hole is obvious because the neutron star signal can be used as accurate as an atomic clock. And therefore, as the orbit decays, it spins faster and faster around the black hole, we should be able to see a Doppler shift in the signal from the neutron star. The problem with this particular report is that it assumes that the change in signal frequency is due to an orbital motion. But then again, the signal from a neutron star is not well explained, since it requires an object that has never been shown to exist, that is, a star made completely out of neutrons, and also no other thought has entered the heads of those theorists as to how you might produce such a well-stabilized signal, the pulse from the pulsar. But plasma physicists, once again, the plasma cosmologists, decades ago showed that not only the steady signal, but also the glitches and other fine structure in the signal can all be explained in terms of a magnetospheric circuit of a star. One of the most accurate signal sources known in the laboratory is known as a trapped ion signal. And the plasma cosmologists were able to show that a stellar magnetosphere could act as a trapped ion oscillator. So when the astronomers, using their standard thinking about neutron stars and black holes, couldn't find the black hole, all it's showing is that the magnetospheric circuit of the pulsing star was changing, not that it was orbiting a black hole.
Well, Wal, you've now more than laid the foundation for this last item I'd like to discuss. And I think that this piece, perhaps more than anything we've talked about today, emphasizes your points about astronomers and astrophysicists reifying things which are not physically real. So let me read briefly from a popular mechanics piece entitled, "This is Wild. Astrophysicists can see stars twisting space and time." It states, "A team of astrophysicists from around the world has been following an unusual pair of spinning stars for almost 20 years. And now they say the binary system is persuasive evidence of frame dragging. In a new paper in Science, the researchers say the white dwarf and neutron star that spin extremely fast together form an edge case to demonstrate relativity." While I literally have nothing to say about space and time being physically twisted by these stars, so I throw it to you.
One of the aspects of this two stars is that one is a white dwarf, the size of the Earth but 300,000 times its density. The other is a neutron star, which, while only 20 kilometers in diameter, is about 100 billion times the density of the Earth, the press release says. This is sheer nonsense. White dwarf stars are not understood. Even Eddington, when he produced the standard model of stars, said these seem to be operating on some different principle. A white dwarf is simply a star that has a corona, which is dim and white. It doesn't have a bright photosphere, so its discharge is a different part of the gas discharge spectrum. And it is not the size of the Earth. It is not 300,000 times its density. It is a normal star. The neutron star, of course, 100 billion times the density of the Earth, is sheer nonsense. You cannot compress matter like that. Gravity doesn't behave in that way. It is merely a case of extending an equation like that of the stretching of a spring. Only you've stretched it so far the spring is broken. The equation no longer works. As I mentioned earlier, the notion of mass is not explained at all in modern physics, and therefore you cannot tell what the density of an object is by measuring its gravity. So the whole model of this orbiting system is invalid. The report goes on to say the tiny neutron star is a pulsar, meaning it emits a steady beam of light that can be tracked as it spins, like when the sun's reflection off a metal object points directly in your eyes as you walk past. This is a simplistic model that makes no sense when you consider that the star has to spin faster than a dentist drill in some instances. So monitoring the frequency of these spinning pulses lets scientists begin to make an overall picture of how the neutron star is orbiting. It does not. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, the pulsing signal from a star is not due to its spinning. It is due to the fact that it is a magnetospheric circuit that behaves like an atomic clock. It is a trapped ion oscillator, which is a very stable oscillating system. The report goes on, all pulsars are useful for research into astrophysics because of the way their size and density makes them behave extremely. The extreme density is only a mathematical result of an invalid physical model. So the pulsar is not locked in a tight and extremely fast orbit, and therefore the so-called evolution has nothing to do with the gravitational system. The report finishes with, All of this means that for the first time, astrophysicists have recorded evidence of the predicted phenomenon of frame dragging. If space-time is colloquially indeed a fabric, it's an elastic one where spinning objects receive that stored energy back from the fabric of space-time itself. That has nothing to do with physics. Space and time are non-physical concepts. In classical physics, space and time are absolute. So you cannot treat it as a fabric, it's not elastic, and spinning objects cannot store energy in this imaginary fabric. It goes on to say, the orbit of the two stars continues to drift and change like a spinning figure skater who accelerates by pulling in their limbs. It is this change in speed and orientation that lets scientists observe the frame dragging. That is an assumption of what the signals mean. This detection is consistent with an evolutionary scenario in which the white dwarf accreted matter from the pulsar, spinning up the white dwarf to a period of less than 200 seconds. This seems an incredible piece of work by the white dwarf, accreting matter from something that is so highly compressed and held together by gravity. How is it going to accrete matter from it? I think the game is given away in the last paragraph. Scientists have longed for evidence of frame dragging in the wild, so to speak, because the idea could explain a lot of things we don't understand yet about relativity, gravity itself, and forces that affect everything from celestial objects to subatomic particles. Of course, but you're not going to find the answers by fiddling with non-physical ideas and no definitions of gravity, mass, energy. We stopped doing physics over a century ago. So the scientists may continue to long for evidence of things, but within their interpretations are so far removed from reality, the answers are always going to be a puzzle.